What the Lone Mountain Man did to the judge's Apache wife was worse than anyone imagined. The Lone Mountain Man lived alone at the very edge of the small town, far up in the rocky hills where few people dared to go. His cabin was old and made of rough wood, perched on a cliff that overlooked the valley below. The man had lived there for many years, and no one really knew much about him. Some people said he was dangerous. Others said he was just lonely. Children whispered his name when they played, and even the grown-ups gave him a wide berth when they passed by his land. The townspeople had long learned that he liked to be left alone, and anyone who ignored that risked trouble. The Lone Mountain Man's life was simple but harsh. He hunted his own food, chopped firewood for warmth, and spent his days repairing his cabin or walking through the hills. He rarely went into town, only when he needed supplies. People noticed him when he came down, his rugged appearance catching their eyes. Wild hair, a thick beard, and clothes worn and patched many times. His eyes were sharp and alert, as if he could see right into someone's soul, and that made people uneasy. At the same time, there was a sense of curiosity about him. No one knew where he came from or why he chose to live alone in the mountains. Some thought he had left the city life behind, or maybe he had family troubles. Others imagined he was running from something he could never forget. But no one ever got close enough to ask. The mountains gave him safety, and he kept it that way. Not far from the Lone Mountain Man's hideout lived the judge and his wife. The judge was a respected man in the town. He had been a fair leader for many years, settling disputes and making difficult decisions. His wife was a kind and intelligent woman. She was Apache, and she carried the pride of her people with grace. People admired her for her courage and wisdom. The judge and his wife were happy, and their home was full of life. They often helped townspeople who were in need, and their reputation for fairness and kindness spread through the valley. Despite their happiness, there was always a tension in the area. People whispered that the Lone Mountain Man had a grudge against outsiders. Some said it was because he had been hurt by people in the past. Others thought he simply didn't like anyone to come near his land. But no one knew for sure. The mountains acted as a natural wall, keeping him isolated, and he liked it that way. Even the judge, for all his courage and sense of fairness, avoided provoking him. He knew the man was unpredictable, and in a small town, a confrontation could quickly become dangerous. The story begins on a warm autumn morning when the leaves were turning gold and red. The Lone Mountain Man was walking along a narrow trail, checking traps he had set for rabbits and other small animals. The sun had barely risen, and the valley below was quiet, with only the soft sound of wind through the trees. He paused to listen, noticing how calm the mountains could be. But he was always alert. In the back of his mind, he knew that the world beyond his hills moved differently. Townspeople had rules, and townspeople had expectations, but the mountains had no rules except those of survival. That morning, the judge's wife had set out on a journey to gather herbs and roots for her home. She often went into the hills to collect plants that could be used for medicine or cooking. She moved quietly, respectful of the land, and careful not to disturb the animals. Her heart was calm, and she enjoyed the peace of being in nature. She wore a simple dress and carried a basket over her arm. The sun warmed her face, and the crisp air made her feel alive. It was a routine she had followed for many years, and she felt safe because she knew the mountains. As fate would have it, the Lone Mountain Man noticed her from a distance. At first, he did not approach. He was curious but cautious. Few people ever came near this part of the hills, and seeing a stranger, even someone from the nearby town, made him uneasy. He watched her quietly, hidden behind a thick cluster of pine trees. There was something about her that caught his attention. her calm confidence, the way she moved through the forest without fear. It reminded him of how careful he had to be in his own life. Meanwhile, in town, the judge was preparing for a busy day at the courthouse. Papers were stacked on his desk, and the weight of responsibility rested heavily on his shoulders. He had no idea that the events of this morning would soon change the rhythm of their lives. His wife had left before dawn, as was her habit, and he trusted that she would return by late afternoon. He did not know that the mountains could be a place of danger as well as beauty. As the lone mountain man continued to observe her, his thoughts were a mixture of suspicion and fascination. He was a man who had learned to survive on his own, and he did not trust easily. But he also remembered how rare it was to see someone who respected the land and understood it. He wondered who she was and why she was there. His instincts told him to stay hidden, to keep the distance, but a part of him wanted to know more. The woman, unaware of being watched, moved deeper into the forest, collecting herbs and checking the small plants that grew among the rocks. She hummed softly to herself, a melody that seemed to belong to the mountains. Her movements were graceful, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity. The lone mountain man noticed the care she took, the way she avoided breaking branches or disturbing nests. It reminded him of a time when people treated the land with respect, before the town had grown and brought noise and disruption. By mid-morning, the two were closer, though still separated by a thicket of trees. The lone mountain man's curiosity grew, but he reminded himself to stay back. He had learned that people could be unpredictable, and he did not want to draw attention. Yet, in his solitude, he had never seen anyone like her. Her presence stirred memories he had long tried to forget, memories of loss, of family, and of the town that had never understood him. The day continued quietly, but tension hung in the air. The mountains were alive with sounds, birds calling to one another, leaves rustling, and the distant echo of a creek flowing over rocks. Both the lone mountain man and the judge's wife moved through the forest with care, aware of the terrain, but unaware of how close their paths had come to crossing. In that moment, neither realized that their lives were about to intersect in a way that no one in the valley could have imagined. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shifted, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The lone mountain man knew that the world outside his mountains was coming closer, even if slowly. He felt the tension building, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and a deep-seated wariness that came from years of living alone. For the judge's wife, the day was peaceful, filled with the quiet joy of her work and the freedom of being outdoors. She did not suspect that someone was watching, someone who had learned to survive by observing and waiting. By the time she began to head back toward the path leading to the town, the lone mountain man had made a decision. He would remain hidden, for now, but he would not forget her. Something about her presence had unsettled him, and yet intrigued him. For the first time in many years, he felt a connection to another human being, even as he reminded himself to stay cautious. The mountains had taught him to survive, but they had never prepared him for the unexpected. The morning ended quietly, with the lone mountain man retreating to his cabin and the judge's wife returning home with her basket full of herbs. Both had experienced the same forest, the same sunlight, and yet their perspectives were completely different. One saw danger and solitude, the other peace and purpose. And in that quiet distance, a story was beginning to unfold, a story that would touch the lives of the mountains, the town, and the people who live there in ways no one could yet imagine. The next morning, the lone mountain man woke before sunrise. He had spent the night thinking about the woman he had seen in the forest. Even though he had promised himself to stay away, he could not shake the memory of her calm movements, her careful attention to the plants, and the quiet confidence she carried. He had lived in the mountains for years, and his life had been one of solitude. People had come and gone, some out of curiosity, some by accident, but he had never felt a spark of interest in anyone until now. He prepared his small breakfast, a simple meal of dried meat and bread, while the first rays of sunlight touched the peaks around his cabin. From his window, he could see the valley below and the path that led into the hills. It was a familiar view, one that had always brought him comfort. Yet this morning, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, a sense that the world beyond his mountains was slowly moving closer to him, even if he did not want it to. Meanwhile, the judge's wife was already awake. She had planned to go deeper into the hills that day, searching for rare herbs that could only be found near the stream. Her husband had warned her to be careful, but she had reassured him. She had grown up exploring forests and valleys, and she felt confident in her abilities. The day was bright and crisp, perfect for walking through the hills. Her basket was empty at first, ready to be filled with the plants she needed, and she moved with purpose, humming softly as she went. The lone mountain man watched from a distance, hidden among the trees. He had followed her trail silently, careful not to be seen. He wanted to understand her, to know why she came into his mountains, but he reminded himself to remain cautious. He had learned that people could be unpredictable, and that even the smallest mistake could lead to danger. Still, he could not deny that something about her presence intrigued him. She seemed fearless, yet respectful of the land, and he had not seen anyone like that in many years. As she walked, the woman paused to examine a plant growing near the edge of the path. She knelt down carefully, inspecting the leaves and roots, making sure she did not damage the surrounding area. Her fingers were skilled and gentle, moving with the confidence of someone who had learned from experience. She smiled softly to herself, pleased with her discovery, unaware that she was being observed. The lone mountain man's eyes followed her every move. He felt a strange mixture of admiration and caution. By mid-morning, the woman had collected a variety of herbs and roots. She had worked methodically, moving quietly through the forest, always aware of her surroundings but never fearful. Her respect for the mountains was clear in every step she took. The lone mountain man continued to watch from a distance, hidden behind thick brush and tall trees. He noticed how careful she was, how she avoided stepping on delicate plants, and how she paused to listen to the sounds of birds in the wind. It reminded him of a time long ago, before he had chosen solitude, when life had been simpler and filled with connections. As the day progressed, the woman moved closer to a small stream that ran through the hills. She knelt by the water, washing some of the roots she had collected and carefully placing them into her basket. The lone mountain man stayed hidden, observing quietly. He noticed her patience, the way she took her time with every task, and the way she seemed completely at ease in the forest. For a moment he allowed himself to forget the walls he had built around his life and simply watched, feeling a sense of curiosity he had not felt in years. Suddenly, a small rustling noise came from nearby. The woman froze, her senses alert. She looked around carefully, but saw nothing. The lone mountain man had shifted slightly, stepping on a fallen branch without realizing it. She relaxed when she did not see anyone, attributing the sound to a small animal. Still, she was cautious, always aware of her surroundings. The mountains had taught her to respect the hidden dangers as much as the beauty. After a few moments, she resumed her work, kneeling by the stream and placing the washed herbs into her basket. The lone mountain man remained still, watching her every move. He felt a strange tension inside him, a mixture of fascination and caution. He knew he should keep his distance, but he could not help observing her. He realized that she had something that few people possessed, a combination of courage, skill, and respect for the world around her. It was rare, and it intrigued him more than he wanted to admit. Meanwhile, back in town, the judge was finishing his work at the courthouse. He had no idea that his wife was so far into the hills, or that someone was watching her from the shadows. He trusted her judgment and her skills, but he had no way of knowing the events that were quietly unfolding in the forest. He looked forward to her return, expecting the usual stories of herbs collected and observations of the mountains. Little did he know, that morning would mark the beginning of a connection between two very different people, one from the town and one from the mountains, that would test courage, patience, and understanding. As the afternoon approached, the woman prepared to leave the stream. She checked her basket, making sure she had everything she needed. The lone mountain man observed her, noting her careful movements and the way she treated the land with respect. He realized that he had been drawn to her presence not because of the town she came from, but because of who she was as a person. She moved through the world with grace, intelligence, and care, qualities he had not encountered in a long time. He made a decision to follow her at a safe distance, curious to see where she would go next. He kept to the shadows, moving quietly among the trees, careful not to be seen. The woman walked steadily, unaware of the attention she was receiving. She paused occasionally to admire the view or examine a plant, enjoying the peace and beauty of the forest. The lone mountain man stayed back, respecting her space, but intrigued by every detail of her actions. By late afternoon, the woman began to make her way back toward the path that led to the town. The lone mountain man watched her from a distance, making mental notes of her habits, her movements, and the care she took with every step. He realized that he was witnessing something rare, a person who could move through the world without fear, who respected the land, and who carried herself with quiet confidence. For a man who had spent years in isolation, it was a strange and compelling experience. As she disappeared from sight, making her way down the hill toward the town, the lone mountain man felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. He had maintained his distance, as he promised himself, but he could not deny the impact her presence had on him. He returned to his cabin, thoughtful and reflective, considering the unusual encounter and what it might mean for his life. The mountains were his home, but now, for the first time in many years, he wondered about the world beyond them, and about a woman who had entered his life without even knowing it. That evening, the mountains were quiet. The lone mountain man sat by his fire, thinking about the woman and her courage. He realized that he had underestimated the strength and intelligence of someone from the town, someone who had shown him that respect and care could exist even in the harshest places. The memory of her careful steps, her soft humming, and her attentive gaze lingered in his mind. He knew that tomorrow and the days after, the forest would feel different. There was a new presence in his mountains, one that had awakened something long dormant inside him. And so the day ended quietly, with the lone mountain man alone in his cabin, reflecting on what he had seen. The judge's wife had returned safely to her home, unaware of the silent observer who had followed her that day. The mountains remained as they had always been, beautiful, quiet, and full of secrets. But something had changed. Two lives had crossed paths, and though neither fully understood it yet, the events of that day would set in motion a story of curiosity, caution, and connection that would grow in ways neither could have predicted. The morning sun broke through the mountains with a gentle golden light, illuminating the forest where the lone mountain man had spent his life in quiet isolation. He rose early, as he always did, but today was different. He could not stop thinking about the judge's wife, Her presence lingered in his mind, and he realized that the quiet forest no longer felt the same without the sound of her movements. He decided to take a longer walk that day, moving along the trails he had known for years, partly out of habit and partly to see if he might catch a glimpse of her again. The forest was alive with the sounds of morning. Birds called from the treetops, and a small stream gurgled over stones as the water made its way down the hills. The lone mountain man moved carefully, stepping over roots and rocks with ease, his senses alert. Living in the mountains had taught him to notice the smallest changes, the sound of a branch snapping, a footprint in the dirt, or the faint scent of smoke from a distant fire. He moved quietly, keeping to the shadows, watching the world with the patience of someone who had lived alone for many years. Meanwhile, the judge's wife had also started her day early. She had prepared her basket for another journey into the hills, this time aiming to gather roots that grew only near the northern slope of the mountains. The judge had reminded her to be cautious, and though she promised she would, she carried herself with confidence. She knew the mountains well, and she had spent countless hours walking these trails. Her steps were steady and her eyes moved constantly, scanning the environment. She listened to the forest and felt at peace, unaware that someone watched her movements from a distance. As she walked, the lone mountain man observed her carefully. He stayed hidden behind a group of pine trees, maintaining a safe distance. He did not want to frighten her or appear threatening, yet he could not ignore the curiosity he felt. Her presence in the forest stirred memories he had long buried. He remembered times when people had entered his life unexpectedly. Some brought pain, others had brought kindness, and he realized that he had not encountered someone quite like her before. She was cautious, yet fearless, respectful, yet strong. At one point, the woman paused near a large rock, examining a patch of plants that grew in the shade. She knelt down, her fingers brushing lightly over the leaves. The lone mountain man crouched behind a nearby tree, careful to remain unseen. He noticed the way she worked, methodical, patient, and deliberate. Every action she took showed care and thoughtfulness. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of admiration for someone from the town, someone who was not part of his world yet had moved through it with such ease and respect. As the day progressed, the forest seemed to grow more alive. The lone mountain man followed quietly at a distance, his curiosity growing. He had never followed anyone before. People had avoided him for years, respecting his solitude. But something about her presence had changed the rules. She moved without fear, and he felt a strange pull to understand her, to know her better. He reminded himself to stay cautious, but it was difficult to ignore the human connection he sensed. Meanwhile, the woman reached a small clearing where sunlight streamed through the trees. She placed her basket on the ground and began to sort the roots and herbs she had collected. She hummed softly to herself, enjoying the warmth of the sun on her face. She felt a sense of satisfaction with her work, unaware that the lone mountain man had stopped nearby to watch. He noticed her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she found a particularly useful plant, and he felt a quiet, almost unexplainable warmth in his chest. It had been a long time since he had felt anything like this. Suddenly, a small sound came from behind a bush. The woman froze, her hands hovering over her basket. Her instincts were sharp, and she could sense when something was not quite right. She looked around carefully, her eyes scanning the trees, but saw nothing. The lone mountain man had accidentally stepped on a dry branch as he moved closer to get a better view. He immediately froze, realizing his mistake. She relaxed slowly when she saw no one, thinking the sound had come from a small animal. Still, she remained cautious, her senses alert to the slightest change in her surroundings. The lone mountain man stepped back, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. He had wanted to remain unnoticed, but now he realized that even a small sound could have startled her. He reminded himself to keep distance, to watch quietly, and to respect her space. Yet, he could not stop thinking about her. He understood that his fascination with her could be dangerous, both for her and for himself. Living alone for so long had taught him caution, but curiosity was difficult to control. The woman continued her work in the clearing, gathering more herbs and roots. She moved with a rhythm she had learned from years of experience. She inspected every plant carefully, making sure she collected only what was needed, without damaging the surrounding environment. She hummed again, her melody mixing with the sounds of the forest. For a moment, the lone mountain man allowed himself to simply watch, appreciating her skill and dedication. It was a rare thing to see someone interact with the world in such a mindful and respectful way. By midday, the woman decided to rest for a short while. She leaned against a tree and took a sip of water from her flask, enjoying the quiet of the forest. The lone mountain man remained hidden, observing her silently. He felt an unusual mixture of emotions: curiosity, admiration, and a cautious sense of connection. He had spent years avoiding people, trusting no one, and yet here he was, drawn to someone in a way he could not fully explain. He realized that her presence had stirred something long dormant inside him. After her short rest, the woman began to make her way toward a narrow path that led deeper into the mountains. She had plans to gather a few more rare herbs before returning home. The lone mountain man followed at a safe distance, careful to stay out of sight. He wanted to understand her better, to observe her actions without interfering. As he moved quietly through the forest, he thought about the life he had built for himself, the isolation, the safety, and the independence. Yet he also wondered if there was room in his world for something or someone new. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the forest grew warmer. The woman paused near a small brook, kneeling to collect a plant that grew near the water's edge. The lone mountain man watched from behind a group of bushes. He noticed the care with which she moved, the gentle way she handled each plant, and the soft expression on her face. It reminded him of a time when he had seen kindness in the world, before life had taught him to be wary of others. He realized that her presence was more than a curiosity. It was a quiet challenge to the life he had built in solitude. Eventually, the woman stood up and began to walk back toward the path leading down the mountains. The lone mountain man stayed hidden, following at a safe distance. He understood that today had been different from any other day in years. He had observed her without her knowing, felt a connection he could not explain, and experienced emotions that were foreign to him. For the first time in a long while, he thought about the possibility of human connection, even though he knew it came with risks. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest, the woman disappeared from view, making her way toward the town. The lone mountain man returned to his cabin, thoughtful and reflective. The forest around him seemed quieter, as if it had witnessed the events of the day and acknowledged their significance. He realized that the simple act of observing her had changed something inside him. The mountains, once a place of complete solitude, now felt like the setting for a story that was beginning to unfold, a story that neither he nor the judge's wife could fully understand yet, but one that would shape the days to come. That evening he sat by his fire, thinking about her courage, her skill, and the quiet way she moved through the world. He knew that tomorrow, and the days after, the mountains would feel different. Something had entered his life unexpectedly, and though he did not yet understand it, he sensed that the story of their lives was now intertwined. A lone mountain man realized that even in the isolation of the mountains, human connection could not be completely avoided, and sometimes it arrived in the most unexpected ways. The morning began quietly in the small town below the mountains. The judge's wife had spent the previous evening sorting the herbs she had gathered, arranging them carefully in jars and baskets. Her day had been long yet peaceful, and she had shared a warm dinner with her husband. They spoke about daily matters and the responsibilities of the town, never guessing how close danger and curiosity had quietly followed her into the mountains. Outside, the sun rose slowly over the peaks, painting the forest in warm shades of gold, unaware of the tension that was about to unfold. The lone mountain man had awakened before sunrise as usual, but today his mind was restless. For days he had observed the woman, learning her habits and movements. He had never allowed himself to grow so interested in another person, and he struggled with the unfamiliar feelings inside him. Curiosity, admiration, and a strange longing mingled together, creating a sense of unease. He knew he could not let himself get too close, yet the thought of her safety, or of missing the chance to see her, pulled him toward the path she would take that morning. As the woman prepared for her journey into the hills, she felt a calm confidence. Her basket was empty, ready to be filled, and she checked her supplies carefully. She had learned to anticipate challenges in the forest, uneven paths, slippery stones, or sudden weather changes, but today, nothing seemed amiss. She moved through the town with purpose, her steps steady and precise, and she greeted neighbors politely as she passed. No one noticed the lone mountain man's silent presence high above the path, watching from behind the trees. The forest seemed welcoming at first. Birds sang and the wind rustled through the leaves in a soothing rhythm. But as she walked deeper into the mountains, a sense of unease began to settle over her. She felt eyes on her. Not dangerous eyes, perhaps, but curious ones. The feeling was subtle, almost like a whisper on the wind, yet it was enough to make her glance around. She saw no one, only the familiar trees and rocks. Still, she became more attentive, noticing small details she might normally have ignored: the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant snap of a branch. The lone mountain man followed at a safe distance, careful not to reveal himself. He had watched her for days, learning her routes and habits, and today he felt an unusual pull to understand her more closely. For the first time, he questioned his usual caution. Normally, he avoided people entirely, yet now he could not stop thinking about her movements, her gestures, and the quiet way she respected the forest. Something inside him stirred, a curiosity that was almost uncomfortable, yet impossible to ignore. As she paused by a small clearing near a rocky outcrop, the woman noticed a patch of rare herbs growing in the shade. She knelt carefully to examine the plants, brushing away loose dirt and debris. The lone mountain man crouched behind a thick bush, his eyes fixed on her. He noticed every detail: the way she handled the plants, the careful placement of each root in her basket, the faint smile on her lips as she worked. He felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. Observing her had become a part of his routine, and yet he realized that if he continued, he might be crossing a boundary he had always respected. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the trees, scattering leaves across the clearing. The woman startled slightly, looking around quickly. The lone mountain man froze, holding his breath as she scanned the area. She crouched lower for a moment, instinctively moving with the caution that had served her well in the forest for years. But seeing no movement, she relaxed and continued her work. The man realized how keen her senses were, and it made him even more aware of his presence. He decided to remain hidden, but made a mental note to adjust his distance more carefully in the future. The woman continued gathering herbs, working methodically. The lone mountain man felt a growing tension inside him. He had never observed anyone so closely without feeling conflicted. On one hand, he admired her skill, patience, and respect for the land. On the other hand, he felt a gnawing anxiety, realizing that his interest in her could be misunderstood if she ever discovered it. For years, he had relied on his solitude for safety, and now that solitude was being tested in ways he had never anticipated. Meanwhile, as she prepared to move toward a narrow path leading further into the mountains, the woman's intuition sharpened. She had been in the forest countless times, and she had learned to sense subtle changes. The feeling that someone might be watching persisted. Though she could see nothing, she tightened her grip on her basket and took deliberate, quiet steps, ensuring that each footfall was careful and balanced. She reminded herself that the forest often carried sounds from far away, and that not every noise signified danger. The lone mountain man watched her closely, noticing how her confidence remained steady despite her awareness. He marveled at her ability to stay calm in a situation that would make most people anxious. At the same time, he recognized that he had gone too far by following her so closely. For the first time, he questioned his own actions. The forest had always been a place of safety and control for him, and now it was a space of moral uncertainty. He debated whether to retreat entirely or continue observing, torn between curiosity and responsibility. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the forest shadows shifted. The woman approached a small stream to wash some of the roots she had collected. The lone mountain man remained hidden behind a cluster of trees. The moment was quiet, yet charged with unspoken tension. He realized that he had been drawn into a delicate situation, where any sudden movement or mistake could create fear or misunderstanding. Still, he could not turn away. He felt compelled to understand her, to witness her care for the land, and to experience the rare sense of human connection that had been missing from his life for years. While she worked by the stream, a sudden sound echoed from upstream, a branch snapping under the weight of some unseen animal. The woman paused immediately, her senses alert. The lone mountain man froze as well, realizing how quickly she could detect even the smallest disturbance. She scanned the area carefully but saw no movement. Her calmness reassured him, and he felt a strange respect for her abilities. He understood that she was not only aware, but also capable of handling challenges on her own, a quality that both intrigued and unsettled him. After several hours of careful work, the woman began to gather her basket and prepare for the journey back. The lone mountain man followed at a cautious distance, determined not to frighten her, but still unable to let her leave without observing her one last time. His mind was filled with conflicting thoughts. Knew he had crossed an invisible line by spending so much time following her, yet he could not ignore the lessons he was learning from her presence. Lessons about patience, observation, and respect. The forest gradually grew quieter as the sun began its descent. Shadows stretched long across the trails, and the woman moved steadily down the path leading toward the town. The lone mountain man remained hidden, contemplating the events of the day. He realized that her presence had changed something in him. His routine of solitude had been disrupted, not violently, but quietly, by the simple act of observing someone who lived with courage and care. He understood that the next days would require him to think carefully about boundaries, morality, and the consequences of curiosity. By evening, the woman reached her home safely, unaware of the observer who had followed her through the mountains. She sorted her herbs and reflected on the day, noting the unusual feeling of being watched without alarm. Meanwhile, the lone mountain man returned to his cabin, reflective and unsettled. He knew that what had begun as curiosity could not remain harmless forever. He had been drawn into a situation where observation alone was no longer sufficient. Choices would have to be made. That night, as the wind rustled through the trees and the forest settled into quiet darkness, he sat by his fire and considered the day's events. He realized that he had to decide how far he would allow himself to be involved in a world he had long avoided. The mountains had been his refuge, but now they had become the setting for a story that involved both caution and courage. He understood that tomorrow would bring new challenges, not only in the forest but also within himself. For the first time in many years, he felt the weight of anticipation and the tension of potential consequences, an awareness that life, even in solitude, could no longer remain entirely predictable. The morning dawned quietly over the small town, with a soft golden light spilling across the streets and rooftops. The judge's wife had already begun her day, her mind focused on preparing meals, tending to small chores, and arranging the herbs she had gathered in the mountains. Though her days were usually peaceful, she carried a sense of awareness that had grown over the past week. She could not shake the feeling that someone had been watching her in the forest. It was not a frightening sensation, just a subtle, quiet presence, like a shadow at the edge of her attention. The lone mountain man, meanwhile, had spent the night thinking deeply about the events of the past days. He had observed her carefully, following her movements and learning about her routines. In that time, he had come to admire her patience, intelligence, and respect for the land. Yet he also knew he could not remain hidden forever. The curiosity and admiration he felt were strong, but they were paired with a new understanding of responsibility. If he approached her or interfered without care, it could frighten her or even endanger her. For the first time in years, he questioned his own actions. As the sun rose higher, he decided to take a slow walk along the ridges near his cabin, reflecting on the lessons he had learned from simply watching her. He realized that his isolation had protected him, but it had also prevented him from experiencing connection, understanding, or trust. Observing her courage and calmness had reminded him that people could live in the world without causing harm, that kindness and care were possible even outside the walls of his mountains. He made a quiet promise to himself. He would respect her space and safety, while also allowing himself to consider the possibility of friendship or trust. The woman set out later that morning for another journey into the forest. This time she moved with a quiet confidence, her senses sharp, her eyes scanning the surroundings with care. She carried her basket, a small knife, and a few tools she had learned to use over the years. She had grown accustomed to the patterns of the forest, the sounds of birds, and the way sunlight changed as it passed through the trees. The forest, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now also carried a sense of curiosity and watchfulness. The lone mountain man observed her from a distance, remaining hidden behind a group of trees. He did not approach, but he felt an unusual mixture of emotions: pride at her skill, admiration at her courage, and a quiet desire to connect without alarming her. He noticed the way she moved, careful not to damage any plants, aware of her surroundings, and respectful of the life around her. He realized that watching her had become more than curiosity. It was a lesson in patience, morality, and understanding human nature. As she walked further into the forest, the woman paused near a small clearing where the sunlight illuminated a patch of wild flowers and herbs. She knelt carefully, sorting the plants she had collected the previous day, arranging them in her basket with care. The lone mountain man watched silently, taking in every detail: the gentle way she handled the plants, the thoughtful expression on her face, and the quiet strength she displayed in each movement. For him, this moment was not about fear or danger. It was about learning, understanding, and appreciating a human presence that was both rare and inspiring. Suddenly, a small animal, perhaps a squirrel, scurried through the underbrush nearby. The woman paused, alert, but she did not panic. Her movements were deliberate, her senses sharp, yet calm. The lone mountain man noticed her composure and felt a profound respect for her abilities. He realized that she had grown up understanding the delicate balance of life in the forest, and that knowledge gave her a strength he had long admired from a distance. He understood that this strength was part of who she was, and it deserved recognition and respect. As the afternoon approached, the woman gathered the remaining herbs and roots she needed. She prepared to head back to the town, carrying her basket carefully and moving with steady steps along the narrow paths. The lone mountain man followed at a safe distance, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He realized that his fascination with her had been a catalyst for self-reflection. He had spent years in solitude, guarding himself against potential harm. Yet watching her had reminded him that connection and trust were possible, even in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. When she reached a small brook along the path, she paused to wash the roots she had collected. The lone mountain man remained hidden. Observing her actions with care, he noticed the attention to detail she displayed, the quiet patience, and the respect for the environment. He also realized that if he approached her incorrectly, it could undo all that he had learned about patience and responsibility. He decided to remain cautious, recognizing that respect for her space was more important than satisfying his own curiosity. Eventually, the woman began to walk down the path that led to the town. The lone mountain man followed at a distance, careful to remain unseen. He felt a mixture of relief and anticipation, relief that she was safe, and anticipation for the lessons that continued to unfold in their quiet interaction. He reflected on how much he had learned about observation, respect, and human connection. He understood that the forest was no longer just a place of isolation. It had become a classroom for understanding empathy, courage, and the power of trust. When the woman arrived home safely, she sorted her herbs and reflected on the day's journey. She had felt the subtle presence of someone observing her, but she understood that it had not been threatening. Instead, it had been a reminder of the complexity of the world outside the town, a world where people had their own fears, habits, and experiences. She felt grateful for her skills, her awareness, and her ability to navigate both the forest and the challenges it presented. The lone mountain man returned to his cabin as evening fell. He sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the events of the day. He realized that his days of complete solitude had shifted. Observing the woman had taught him about patience, morality, and the importance of respecting boundaries. It had reminded him that human connection, while unpredictable and sometimes challenging, could also be enriching and transformative. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction and clarity that he had not experienced in years. Over the next several days, a new routine developed. The woman continued her journeys into the forest, gathering herbs and moving through the mountains with confidence. The lone mountain man observed from a distance, careful to remain hidden but growing increasingly aware of the lessons she brought into his life. He learned about courage, responsibility, and the balance between curiosity and respect. At the same time, he reflected on his own life and realized that isolation, while safe, had also limited his understanding of the world and of human connection. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the forest floor, the lone mountain man made a quiet decision. He would no longer simply observe from a distance. He would find a way to show respect and kindness without frightening her. He gathered a small gift, a bundle of dried herbs he had collected himself, and left it at the edge of the clearing she frequented, along with a simple note explaining that he meant no harm and respected her space. The next morning, the woman discovered the gift. She was surprised but not alarmed. She could see the care in the way the herbs were gathered and the thoughtfulness in the note. She understood that the lone mountain man had intentions of respect and goodwill. She felt a sense of connection, however quiet, and a recognition that not all human interactions were dangerous or harmful. This small gesture marked a turning point, a beginning of mutual understanding and cautious trust. From that day forward, the forest became a place of learning and quiet connection for both of them. The lone mountain man continued to live in the mountains, and the woman continued her journeys. Yet their paths were no longer separate. A silent understanding had formed between them, a respect for each other's presence, a recognition of boundaries, and a shared appreciation for courage, patience, and care. The mountains had witnessed a transformation, not through dramatic events, but through quiet observation, reflection, and the beginnings of trust. The story of the lone mountain man and the judge's wife ended not with conflict, but with understanding. Both had learned valuable lessons about patience, morality, and the possibility of connection. The woman returned safely to her home each day, carrying with her the skills and awareness that had always guided her. The lone mountain man remained in his cabin, enriched by the presence of another human being, and reminded that even in isolation, growth and understanding were possible. And so the mountains, the forest, and the small town became part of a story about courage, respect, and the quiet power of human connection. Though the lone mountain man had lived alone for many years, the presence of the judge's wife had shown him that life could offer both challenges and rewards, that trust could be built, and that even the most isolated lives could be touched by understanding and care.